Welcome to Voice It, a podcast showcasing people in the Clare Valley and the mid-north of South Australia who've started their own businesses from scratch and have turned them into success stories. This is a chance for them to tell you their story. I'm your host, Annabelle Homer.
The number of people I meet, I nearly made it to the Olympics, or I would have been an AFL player. There's a million of those people. And look, for whatever reason, that didn't happen for them. But actually, you can do it.
In this episode, I have the absolute pleasure of interviewing a former Olympian who calls the Clare Valley her home. Anna McVann grew up in the Adelaide suburbs, the youngest of 6 kids. But she wasn't just any kid. At the age of 15, she represented Australia at the Olympic Games in Los Angeles. There she made 4 finals, an amazing result, which put this teenage girl in the spotlight as an up-and-coming Australian swimmer to watch. In this episode, you'll hear about the gruelling training regimes, the diet, the international swimming comps, the Olympic experience, the comeback, Crystal Palace, physioing for the Olympic diving team. This woman has done so much. I just can't wait for you to hear it all. I've never met anyone with so much discipline and determination. Who else would rock up to swimming training in a wheelchair with a leg in plaster and still want to train? This is just one of the many stories you'll hear. After the dizzying heights of swimming stardom and international travel, Anna saw her life to be in Paris or London or even New York. But on a trip back to Australia, she was swept off her feet by a farmer from the Clare Valley, Tom Hawker. She settled down, had 4 children, and set up her own successful physiotherapy business. Strap in. This is Anna's story.
I am the youngest of 6 and grew up in Adelaide. My dad was actually born in France and Mum was from Yarrawonga in Victoria. Dad's not French, by the way. He's English. His parents just happened to be there. They were in the textile industry, living in France at the time. But Dad ended up in Geelong at college and Mum was a Victorian from Yarrawonga and then studied physio and lived in Melbourne. And they had my eldest brother and sister in Melbourne in the early 1960s, and then they moved to Adelaide with Dad's business, which was, as I said, textiles, and the rest of us came along. So youngest of 6.
So all your siblings would have been the ones looking after you, I can imagine.
Well, interestingly, Mum had 6 of us in 8 years. Yeah,
wow.
Yeah. So my eldest sister was born in 1960 and I was born in 1968. So there wasn't a huge age gap between any of us. They did help, but not really. And my eldest sister got married when I was 12, so she left home at 21. And I remember I was only saying to Imogen on the weekend, I remember being, left at, 14 and 15 when all the others were at parties. And on a Saturday night, it'd be Mum and Dad and I would go to Mass and then we'd go out to these really fancy restaurants and have dinner, and I'd always fall asleep at the table because Imogen's a bit like that at the moment. She's the one that's not out. And I said, I remember being just like you. And but we had
So you don't take her to Mass and take her to fancy restaurants?
Well, yes, the Catholic in me would love to say yes. Occasionally she comes to Mass, but not on a Saturday night. So look, I had a very happy childhood, busy, all at school, Catholic schools in Adelaide. So I was at Loreto from grade 1. The boys even went to Loreto back in that day. They had the first few years at Loreto and then they went to Ostreva. We played lots of sports, tennis, netball, and then obviously moved into swimming. So the story goes that I thought Dad used to play golf every Saturday morning, but apparently Dad thought he'd book the kids into swimming lessons so he could take them to Norwood Pool and they could have swimming lessons and he could read the paper on the lawn. So he'd get a little break, even though he worked full time and wasn't home that much. And that's sort of how the family got into swimming.
So how old were you when you started swimming?
We had a pool put in 1974 and I was 6 then, 5 or 6, and I just remember learning to swim when we got the pool in or just before. So I would have been about 4 or 5. And then I just tagged along with the others. I was that annoying little sister at swimming who would be underwater blowing bubbles and pulling down people's bathers and things. So that was sort of the next probably 7 years until I was about 10 or 11.
And is that when you realised, I'm actually not bad at this?
Well,
when did that come?
No, well, actually, I wasn't that good.
Weren't you?
No. No.
Oh, surely.
I mean, look, I guess in the scale of things, but no, I wasn't really. Certainly wasn't the most talented as a young swimmer. But I mean, I did qualify for the nationals when I was 12 years old. So that was sort of the age group then, 12 and under. So I'd sort of come up through the ranks. I mean, I remember things like being at the Shell age, which is the equivalent of Sapsarza sort of thing now, and thinking, you know, I was going to win a medal and I never won a medal, and then I finally won a medal and everyone was so relieved that finally, like, Anna got something. Like, it was that, you know, I was kind of that little girl who, I was quite round then. My nickname was Little Fatty. And so, look, I wasn't really that good, but I did manage to qualify for this national championships when I was 12, and we went to Perth. And as a club team, and there was, you know, maybe 25 of us, and I just assumed, because older kids in the club had been before, that you went to the national championships and everyone automatically won gold medals. And I went to these nationals and had these events, like 3 or 4 events, and I didn't even make a final. And I was just devastated. I was like, oh. And the manager and manageress at the time, their daughter was my age and she'd won a medal. And I remember the parents pulling myself and my dear friend Jane into their room at the end of the national championships and basically sitting us down and saying, you know, you're wasting your parents' time and money. We really think you should try something else. Like, you know, and so we were just like, oh, we thought we'd done all our best times and we hadn't made a final or won a medal. We were pretty happy with ourselves, sort of. So that was sort of the first thing. And then I remember not long after that coming home from those nationals, and we trained at Burnside Pool, and there's the big pool there, but there's also the little pool with the windows. So before the days of video cameras or underwater cameras, the technique sessions were in the little pool at Burnside, where the coach would stand and look through the windows, and then you'd say, no, you're not doing this or this. Well, he maintains that I said to him, I'm going to the Olympics, but I remember him saying to me, I think you could make it to the Olympics. And so I think a combination, and also being the youngest of 6, you know, always trying to prove myself. So it didn't matter what I did. I was always kind of like just, you know, striving for a bit of attention.
So why do you think he said that to you? What did you do for him to say, I reckon you can make it to the Olympics?
Well, I was always a hard worker, and obviously I could swim, but maybe just my personality more than anything, you know, youngest of 6. I think that, just maybe determination.
Did you enjoy it?
I loved it. Yeah, I loved it. And you know, it was so social. I mean, it's like, you know, the Clare Swim Club here, everyone comes along and you have a great time and you go to carnivals and things. So, yeah, I did love it. And so I guess a little sort of fire started burning then, and I guess it was that whole thing that I never doubted myself. Like, I just thought that, okay, well, that's what I'm going to do, which was, you know, so at the age of 12, I didn't even make a national final. By 13, I was ranked number 1 in my age group in Australia. And by 14, I won my first National Open Championships and made my first Australian Open team. So that was the year before the Olympics. You know, so I guess in that time period, of course, you know, obviously 12 months is a long time if you're training twice a day, putting in all the hours, and distance swimming became my focus.
Mm-hmm. So not a sprinter, more long distance.
No, except there's a funny story about that too, but which we'll come to later at the Olympic trials. But so the focus was definitely for distance freestyle swimming, 400 and 800, and that was my target. So and we were in the day in the early 80s where more is best. So we used to have things like Hell Week where we'd swim 120 kilometres. Like, I remember one year over summer. So that was 10 sessions a week, so twice a day, every day, maybe 12 sessions a week, and we'd swim between 10 and 12 kilometres. You know, and that was in the summer holidays. That was sort of, you know, while everyone else was off partying at the beach or having a relaxing summer holiday, we were all sort of, you know, swimming to Murray Bridge, basically. That was sort of the, you know, it's like, I would have got to Murray Bridge this week.
And were you swimming every day? Are we talking every morning, crack of dawn, following that white line?
Yeah. Black line, yeah.
The black line.
Black line. White line fever.
You can tell I'm not a swimmer.
Oh, but your children will be. So following, so up and down. And because I was training distance, I was often training with the boys because they were, you know, just that there weren't sort of many girls, and I was often kept in longer, doing longer sessions and more sessions, and there's a lot of tears. Like, I remember sort of but it didn't stop me. But, you know, it was that whole thing. I never missed a session, even if I was tired or had too much homework. Mum and Dad had sort of pretty much said, well, if you want to do this, it's up to you. We're not waking you up. We're not, you know, I mean, they didn't say we're not taking you. They fully supported me, but they were a bit done with the early morning. So my coach used to pick me up. So I remember, you know, there'd be nights where I'd get up and be all dressed and ready for swimming and realise it was like 3 o'clock in the morning. one time I remember my alarm didn't go off and I went into mum and dad in tears just saying, my alarm didn't go off, can you take me swimming? And they're like, no, bad luck, get your own way. Well, no, I think they did take me in the end. But so there were sacrifices that came with that, obviously, as a teenager.
Who was your coach?
Graham Brown. So I swam for the Burnside. It was Burnside Southside and then Burnside Swimming Club.
And was he known to be a great coach? I mean, what's his legacy?
Well, he had coached Debbie Palmer along with Harry Gallagher. So he was sort of an offset of Harry Gallagher. He'd had lots of national swimmers, but so Harry Gallagher coached Dawn Fraser, and he was sort of in the old Adelaide baths when the pool was at where the festival centre is. He was sort of the forefront of sort of swim coaching in Australia. Had some very famous names, can't name them all off now. He was sort of came on in after that.
So once you did the nationals and you gained momentum, was it then the Pan Pacific that you were involved in?
When I was 14, I was selected on the Australian pre-Olympic team. So the Olympics in 1984 were in Los Angeles. So this was 1983. So I'd really only been to national events. I'd never been overseas. So first up, pre-Olympic meet in Los Angeles. So as a 14-year-old, I was packed off with my koala bear to the other side of the world with, there were no mobile phones or anything, a team of 20 or so, mostly younger swimmers, but it was sort of open team, as a little pre-warm-up to the Olympics. So we had a training camp at Stanford University. So I remember reverse charging mum and dad in tears. Like I didn't sleep, I don't think, the whole time I was there.
What, because you were worried or excited?
I think I was nervous and away from home. I mean, I'd been on school camps and to national championships, but I'd never been away from my family before, in that sort of capacity. And I mean, I was 14 years old, and you think of that now, before mobile phones or anything. I sort of had a kind of sponsorship that some family friends of ours were the Tandies, and sort of Tandy jelly beans sponsored me. And so I remember Dad sending me over Tandy jelly beans to cheer me up. And
they didn't want to go with you?
I don't think it was an option. Oh. And similarly in, to latter years as well, I remember on that trip, and I was really quite homesick, and I remember Bill Sweetenham was the head coach. He was a short, round man, rather amazing coach, pulled me aside one day and said, Anna, just get over it. Like, you're not going home. You're here to swim. Just get over it. It's a waste of time, waste of energy. You've been homesick. Just, forget about it. It was a good lesson to learn early on. And you got on with it? So I got on with it, yeah. And I won a couple of silver medals and a couple of bronze medals at the pre-Olympic meet in Los Angeles. So it was at USC, which is where the Olympics were held the next year. And it was really fun. Like, it was the middle of summer. I mean, we were in Los Angeles. We went to Disneyland. And then I think only a month or two later, they also took me to the Pan Pacific meet, which was in Japan. Oh, wow. So again, as a 14-year-old. So I was in year 10 at school, packed my bags, and off I went to Japan, to Tokyo. And so it was just, and we were treated like rock stars. Like, I remember sort of going into the pool, and there was all these Japanese people like lining the glass doors and like banging on the doors and wanting to swap things with us, and just little, what the Japanese, they have all those intricate little
toys,
Hello Kitty things, and pins, and little lunchboxy things, and I was just in heaven, you can imagine. So I came home from Japan with all of this stuff. Everyone thought it was Christmas. Oh, and similarly, I'd come home from America with like M&Ms and red licorice and all this stuff, Hershey cups and all those things that we never had, didn't have in Australia at that time. So, which is hilarious because, clearly wasn't exactly what an elite athlete should be eating.
I was going to ask you about your diet, whether it was this strict diet that you had to abide by, especially going into those massive events like the Pan Pacific and the Olympics and all those type of things. Was there a diet that you had to stick by? And did you feel like you were hungry all the time?
No. I don't think so, no. Obviously, you can imagine in a big family, I just got whatever was on the plate. We had a fairly basic diet at home, and I actually swam on a diet of steak and beetroot. So if we had a big meet at home, I would get up in the morning, have steak and beetroot, go off, race the heats, come home, have another steak and beetroot and ice cream and jelly, have a sleep, wake up, have another. So that was sort of my racing diet.
Why steak and beetroot?
I don't know. That was just what Mum served me. And I guess in hindsight, I mean, that, very wholesome, the steak is the protein. So that was my sort of racing diet. If it was school holidays and we went to someone's house for breakfast, there'd be pancake competitions or Wheat Bix competitions to see who'd eat the most Wheat Bix. So nothing really structured about my diet. I mean, there was a few, there was definitely talks on dietitians from time to time. Weren't really into carb loading or anything like that even in those days. So I had a pretty normal diet,
That's good. That's good. That's actually quite refreshing to hear, because you just hear about these elite athletes who have to be on these strict diets and strict routines. And I love it. Steak and beetroot all the way.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
And ice cream and jelly.
And ice cream and jelly. And pancake eating competitions.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the Pan Pacific Championships in Tokyo.
So I went over there at, similar as a, pretty fresh-faced 14-year-old. And, I got a silver medal in the 800 freestyle. So that was pretty impressive. So it's all looking, pretty good for the Olympics. And then, so that was August. And so then hard summer ahead of swimming, training. And then we had Olympic trials in maybe the February or March. And the Olympics were then in August. So the thing about the Olympic trials in those days, similar to now, you had to finish in the top 2 in your event, and you had to go under the qualifying time to make the Olympic team. So headed to Brisbane for that, and I entered all freestyle events and I think the medley. So I had a massive program, which was pretty normal for me. So my 400 and 800 were my sort of goals to make the Olympic team. And I think the 200 freestyle might have been the first night, and I won that. So that was quite not expected. And then I ended up winning the 400 and the 800. And then on the last night, I had the 100 free, which I'd entered because I really wanted to make the relay team, and the 1500, which was an Olympic event at that stage. So I remember going into the 100 free, just thinking, it'd be really great if I got in the top 4, I think. Yeah, because I didn't used to take 6 then. And I remember being at the halfway mark and doing the tumble turn and looking across the pool and thinking, I'm in this. I won the 100 freestyle, which is ridiculous because I wasn't a sprinter. I mean, I was had a reasonable 100 time, but, these poor girls had trained their whole life and they were built, I was this tiny little greyhound stick thing.
You weren't the round kid
anymore?
Definitely,
my nickname had become Little by then. So I'd gone from little fatty to just little. That was my brother's, had to drop the fatty. And I won the 100 free, but it's so funny. I remember looking at the replay of that and I was so not in the money at the turn. I don't know what I saw when I looked across the pool, but, and I think that just was that just focus of mine. I was just, I just thought, I can do this.
So you won every single event.
And then the 1500 as well that night. Yeah. So
did that just blow your mind? That
I didn't think really anything of it, but it's always, whenever anyone, now, what are we, 30 something years later, people still sort of refer to that as the, the benchmark, that I was the only person. I'm not sure if Shane Gould had done that before me, and I don't know if anyone has done it since.
Really?
Or maybe certainly not in Olympic trials anyway. And it defied all the, physiologists because, if you're a sprinter, you're not a distance swimmer, your makeup's very different. So it was, I sort of don't really know how I did it either. So that was just me being, I was 15 then, so I was in year 11 at school, made the Olympic team. And there was a bit of hype too at the time because the gold medalist from Moscow, Michelle Ford, had also competed to make the Olympic team, and she'd had a shoulder injury and didn't finish in the top 2 and didn't get to go to the Olympics. So there was protests on, and it was sort of all, a bit controversial about, how did I feel if this girl, and I was a bit like, whatever. I just kind of stayed out. It was all a bit much for me. I just went back to school and...
Well, speaking of school, were you treated like a bit of a celebrity, a bit of a rock star at school?
It's funny, I do often now run into people who went to school with me who were a bit younger, and they, I remember you from school. The school was amazing. They really looked after me. I was allowed to sort of skip PE lessons, and because when I was training, obviously my schedule, I was quite exhausted, and so that year 11 was a bit of, the school accommodated me very well for that, and the whole school stopped when I swam at the Olympics, and the whole of my year 11 class was at the airport to meet me when I came home, and friends went and saw me off. So big send off and big welcome home. It was pretty exciting. I mean, Loreto College in Adelaide, well, a convent I think we were still then even. It was so lovely for me just because I had that massive community supporting me. And
how did you, before we get to the Olympics, how did you balance school life? I know they said they were quite accommodating, but to keep up with your schoolwork as well as have a gruelling swimming schedule like that?
Yeah, I was just pretty organised. I was very routine. And in fact, to this day, I find I'm so much better if I have a routine. But, we get up in the morning, train, so up at 4:30, pool at 5, swim till 7, 7:30 to school, home after school. Often had a bit of a window after school, so I'd do my homework in that half an hour, and then swimming till maybe 7, and then home, and then homework for a little bit, and then sort of bed at 8:30, eat, sleep, repeat kind of thing. So I was very sort of structured and disciplined.
When did you socialise with your friends?
Well, I did manage to do that a bit on weekends. I didn't miss out on much. There were definitely over the summer it was hard. I didn't get to go to the beach. A lot of friends went to Victor Harbour and things for holidays, and we didn't do a lot of that. I still managed to go to a few parties on the weekend. Don't you worry about that. And anything I missed out on, I caught up on soon after. I mean, obviously down the track, it did get to the point where I realised it was more fun getting home at 4:30 in the morning than getting up at 4:30 in the morning, and that was sort of the crucial turning point that my swimming career didn't last much longer after that. But I mean, it's like anything, you just make the sacrifices, and I was very focused on what I was doing, and I had a lot of friends doing the same thing. We had a big network of friends, and still some of my best friends to this day are people that I swam with here.
Well, let's talk about the Olympics. How did you go after that awesome success at the trials?
Well, I ended up being selected. I just swam the 200, 400 and 800 freestyle and the relay. I didn't do the individual 100-metre freestyle because that was sort of a too big a program. We flew over like a month before the Olympics, had a training camp again at Stanford. So it was all very similar to what we'd done the year before. So I was fairly sort of familiar with it all.
Not homesick this time?
A little bit, but not really. But again, none of my family were there, which I just sort of, I guess now as a mother, you think, oh, wow. And they always maintained that they'd see more on television. And they were probably right. My coach came over, but he wasn't a part of the coaches of the team. Like he wasn't on the team. So he wasn't really allowed in the village or on pool deck. Sort of I'd talk to him through the fence and stuff. So I sort of had a coach, Laurie Lawrence. I was allocated Laurie as my coach.
Oh, what was he like?
Yeah. Interesting. Like very sort of inspirational, motivational. Yeah, I ended up later in 86 going up to Brisbane to train with him, but that's sort of down the track. But yeah, so he was sort of my coach and he liaised with Graham, who was over there, but no family or friends. There was one family from Adelaide who swam with us, and her mother had come to the Olympics, and I remember walking out for my first final and seeing a sign that said "Go Anna from Adelaide," and that was lovely. The village was just like a circus, everything on tap, M&M's, McDonald's. The food hall was just, it was just amazing. Movie cinemas. Like I remember seeing Ghostbusters, at the Olympic Village. The M&Ms and the brownies were fairly sort of high on my list of
priorities too.
So you could get your hair done by Vidal Sassoon. So it was really fun. And I remember sort of there was bunting everywhere, in the Olympic colours, and Laurie used to make us sit with a different faculty every time. So you'd sit with the Bulgarian weightlifters or the African athletes, and all shapes and sizes, creeds and colours, all languages. It was amazing. And I've still got what is it now? 30 years later? Is it? 40 years later. I can still remember it so clearly. Well, I remember the opening ceremony. That was just like we sat in the boxing hall, I think it was, for hours while the actual, all the performances were on. And I remember sitting on Rob Di-Castella's knee and catching up with Dean Lucan because he was obviously, a South Australian and, massive. Imagine me as a little 15. It's tall, but I was just a 15-year-old girl, really, and all these amazing athletes. So it
was Lisa Curry in the mix then? Or?
Yeah, so she was on the team and the Mean Machine, so Neil Brooks and lots of older, I was one of the younger members of the team, not the youngest. There was a girl, I was 15 and there was a 14-year-old girl on the team. And there was a couple of other 16, 17-year-olds. So there's a young crew of us, but there was also a lot of the older, sort of wiser, more experienced swimmers. So it was amazing, yeah. And I remember the races, and so I had the 200 first. Wasn't expected to make the final and made lane 8 and I think came 8th, but did a personal best then. And the 400 made the final, did a personal best and finished 5th. And then the 800 was my last and my sort of biggest event. And I swam the heat one morning and I qualified second fastest. I'd done a personal best time by I think 3 seconds or something. So it was quite good, and went in second fastest into the final. So we had the heat one morning and then we had that afternoon and then we had a rest day and then I had another day and the final was the following night. That was hard because it sort of delayed things out. But I ended up finishing 4th in the 800, but I'd still done, I don't think I went as fast as I did in the heat. But even if I had, I wouldn't have got a medal. So it's the thing with an 800 is you just want to make the final. So some of the other girls hadn't killed themselves in the heat. And then obviously I got 4th, which the race before mine was John Sieben, and he was one of my training buddies. Laurie Lawrence coached him and he won the gold medal in the race before me. So I was like there. I was like, I've got this. So I guess I was a little bit disappointed that I hadn't got a medal, but 4th at the Olympic Games. So I ended up...
Was it also because you had qualified for second fastest, so you had it in your head that you can do this?
Yeah. Well, I sort of always... I was obviously going for gold. That was the ultimate. Certainly wasn't ranked number 1 in the world by any means. Like I think I was probably only 7th or 8th in the world going into the Olympics. You know, you always believe you can do these things.
So what happened after that, your first Olympics?
Oh, well, we had a lot of fun straight after the Olympics, I must say. Thank goodness there was no social media.
Please tell. What did you get up
maybe
to?
Maybe not. Maybe off the air another time. But we had lots of parties in the village, got to sort of travel, move around LA a bit as a 15-year-old. And not sure I'd really want my 15-year-old daughters or sons, for that matter, doing the same. I think because the swimming's first up, and then you could potentially stay in the village for the closing ceremony. But what the Australian swimming did was move all the younger kids, the underage kids, we went to Hawaii on the way home. So they took us to Hawaii, and we were in Hawaii for a few nights, and that was fun.
Wow.
Very fun. Bought my first boogie board. I think I've got a photo of that in there of me signing my boogie board. We became the boogie team, Australian boogie team. And, we came home. So I hadn't seen my family for probably a couple of months, and Qantas were very excited that we were on the plane. So I sort of got off the plane, just desperate to kind of see my family. And my whole year 11 class of Loreto were at the airport, which was lovely. But I was tired, and I think they might have even given us some champagne on the plane. So I just was like, I just want my family. So I remember that was really overwhelming. The media were there and everything, and people had flowers, and I had my koala bear and my jacket on, and it was all very exciting. And so the whole
signing autographs and doing all that.
Yeah.
Do you remember the first time you were approached to sign an autograph? Was that like a big deal back in the day?
I mean, people would come up with their autograph books, and of course I had an autograph book, so I knew that. Like I used to do that sort of thing. So I used to love that, and I'd always put a little smiley face and stuff. It certainly, I was famous in my little area. Do you know what I mean? I mean, in Adelaide, there weren't not many Olympic athletes ever from South Australia. So, we had the big ticker tape parade when we got back. That was that photo you said you'd seen with me waving on the
from a balcony or
Adelaide.
something. Yeah,
the town hall. The town hall.
Oh, there's a town hall.
Yeah, it was the town hall. Photo. Yeah, and so there was lots of hype, and obviously the school, everyone was so excited, and all the schools, because Adelaide's so small, and because I was from a big family, everyone knew everyone. So, everyone had a connection to our family. And I think my brothers and sisters for years were just so tired of being, you Anna McVann's brother or sister. And so, now I always tell them if I run into someone and they say, oh, are you Mary Lou's sister, or are you John's sister or Sue's sister? I said, someone just asked me if I was your, so it sort of all comes around in the end.
Yeah.
I think they all got a bit sick of it. But
I was going to ask you, when you saw your family for the first time when you got home from the Olympics, I mean, what were they like? Were they emotional? What were they like?
Yeah, I think so. I can't really remember. It was always funny though. I mean, I think that was probably a bit of a secret to my success, was that it didn't really matter what I did. I was still the sixth in the family. And I'd often get that, we don't care how many Olympics you've been to or how many gold medals you've won, you're still like bottom of the run. And even now to this day, look, I love them all dearly, but I still feel like it, even now that I'm 53 and I have a master's degree and 4 children, and they still like to give me a bit of advice, which I take. It's really nice to come from a big family and have all that support and cocoon you a bit too.
So what happened after the Olympics? The Commonwealth Games was the next on the list.
So I was in year 11 when I got back from the Olympics. So I took a bit of a break, and then in that summer I swam faster again over that summer and made a European tour. So I went to Paris, Amsterdam, so Holland and France on a tour. I remember my French teacher, I was doing French in year 12. I'm not quite sure why, I was never very good at it, but she was so upset because we'd been to Paris and we didn't even see the Eiffel Tower. So that was fun.
Can't believe you didn't see the Eiffel Tower.
I know, we probably did. I probably just wasn't looking. But we definitely didn't go to the Eiffel Tower because it was, in the burbs of Paris. The pool was indoor. It was winter. It was freezing. So that was fun. That was another sort of young crew of kids, sort of a stepping stone to the next thing. And then I sort of pulled back quite a bit in my year 12. So I was quite focused, and mum and dad always said you can't swim forever and you've got to have an education, and everyone did, particularly Olympics and stuff. I remember taking books away with me when I went on those previous tours, and people were like, what are you doing? Like, a lot of them didn't really rate school, whereas I was very focused on school, and my family was very much, you are going to get an education despite all of this, and I was fine with that. Like, it was just
did
what I did.
Did you know what you wanted to do?
Well, I did. I always wanted to be a physio. Well, mum was a physio, and I spent a lot of time in physio, but at physios I didn't really think they helped me a lot. It's funny, my youngest was reiterating this the other day, but with my job I wanted to travel the world, be able to work part-time, and be financially independent, which we all laugh about because my husband would debate the latter, but that's because I went on and had 4 children very quickly. But that sort of was always my thing. I wanted to travel the world and work as a physio, and Mum had done that. She'd gone on a boat to Canada and worked and stuff. So, and it was hard, as it is now too, hard to get into physio. So you had to get a very good, whatever it was called then.
I'm impressed that you had what you had, and then you got a score that was quite high. So you were smart as well, Anna. Jeez.
Well, I worked
some kids
pretty
just have it
hard.
all.
Well, we would say I'm good on paper, but my husband would debate whether I'm all that worldly. That whole like good on paper, but sometimes not so street smart. But during year 12, I swam every morning, trained every morning, but in the afternoons I would either run or I had a swim bench, which is kind of like a rowing machine, but it's a swimmer's rowing machine. So you lie on your tummy and pull your straps rather than row in the pool room at home. So every afternoon I'd either run home from school or I would do my swim bench. And then I would study. I had this massive routine that I just studied. And so I took a step back with my swimming, but didn't enter many meets, didn't travel.
Okay, Charlie. Charlie's very protective.
Pretty standard.
Off he goes.
Yeah, so just got through year 12 and I remember finishing my exams and I was determined to go to schoolies for a few days and I didn't tell my coach because we had then Commonwealth Games trials were in the February. So this was obviously November, when school. So I took off to schoolies for a few days and didn't tell him. I remember coming back. He's like, "Oh, you're back." I'm like, "Yeah." I was like, had torn the ass out of schoolies for a few days and come home. And then I just hit, back into full-on training. And so unfortunately then I had a bit of an injury, like my shoulders, because it's all about the load now. We know that now. But back then I was just like, quick, got to get fit. I was fit. Obviously I'd still been training, but had to sort of raise the bar. And in those days we were of the mentality that you train like harder and further is better rather than, now you train smart and you don't need to do the loads that we did. But we were back into that. And of course in my brain I knew what I'd done before the Olympics, so I wanted to get up to those miles, like the 120 Ks a week, so that I could feel confident that when I came to race I had that money in the bank and I was all ready to go. So unfortunately got a few shoulder injuries and was not ideal, but came Olympic trial time as Commonwealth Games trials in the February and they were in Adelaide and I qualified. I finished I think second in the 800 and maybe third in the 400 and I think maybe fourth or fifth in the 200. So made the Commonwealth Games team, which was to go to Scotland later that year. And I'd sort of finished school. I'd taken a gap year. So I got into physio. I think I can't remember what I got for my year 12.
I was going to ask you what score you got.
Oh, I think it was about 432. It was out of 500. French let me down in the end, 76. I'll never forget. I don't know why. And still to this day can't really speak French.
See, if you just searched for the Eiffel Tower, things would have just come on your way.
I know. And spoken more French over there maybe.
Yeah, that might have been.
Might have been, got me across the line. Anyway, got into physio and deferred for a year so I could concentrate on swimming. And I was a bit bored with Adelaide and everyone else was going off doing their own thing. So I decided I'd move to Brisbane and train with Laurie Lawrence in the lead up to the Commonwealth Games. Moved up there, went and stayed with another swimming family and that didn't go so well. My shoulders were still a bit sore and I had a manual car, but Mum and Dad had trucked Mum's Rover Quintet up there for me to drive and I lived with this swimming family and then so that didn't work out really. So then I moved.
Why didn't it work out?
I don't know.
Just didn't click.
Yeah. Look, it was a mother-daughter and I'd come from a really big family and it was just all a bit isolating. Food was very different. So then I moved to some family friends that lived up there. They lived right near the city. And that was fun. They had a bit more buzz about their family, but they actually ate a lot of spicy food. I'll never forget, you'd get home starving from training because we literally trained. We'd train in the morning, go somewhere for breakfast to someone's house, then we'd run and do weights, and then we'd go home for like an hour or two, and then we'd be back at the pool from 3 till 7. So we trained pretty much like 7 or 8 or 10 hours a day. And I'd get home to these friends' house and there'd be these yummy looking rice salads and I'd take a bite and they'd have like spice in them. They'd be really hot. We didn't eat a lot of hot food back in the McVann house at Darwood Court. It was all pretty sort of, standard, bland food.
Yeah, steak and beetroot.
Yeah, steak and beetroot, meat and 3 veg, roast occasionally, lamb chops, chopped casserole, all the standards.
What else do you need? You don't need anything fancy.
Exactly.
Where did you train?
We trained at Chandler. So I think I struggled a bit with that. And also the other thing too is I was like a bull at a gate and we trained really hard. Even though I was probably smarter than them on paper, they were a bit smarter than me that they wouldn't train hard every session. But we used to run stairs up and down Chandler. Chandler was, built for the Commonwealth Games in 82. And so we used to run stairs in bare feet, up and down stairs. Anyway, came home for my graduation. I can't remember what month it was. I'd only been up there for a few months. Remember running with my brother, my older brother. He was the one that used to call me Little Fatty and then had to call me Little because he went overseas and came back and I wasn't fat anymore. And we were running around the Torrens, and I think we were about where the tennis is, that about there, Next Gen is. And I had this really sharp pain in my ankle, my leg. And I said to John, I've got a really sharp pain. And he's like, oh, don't be such a wimp. So off we ran down around the weir, back around to the festival theatre. And by then I just said, I can't run any further. I have to stop. And he's like, oh, I think he thought I was getting a bit soft. Anyway, it happened just to be a policeman cruising around the festival theatre. And he's like, oh, my sister's hurt her ankle. I don't suppose you could drive us home. He was living in North Adelaide at the time. The police was like, yeah, sure. Anyway, I was so relieved the next day when I had the x-ray, and I actually had a stress fracture of my fibula, even though I was devastated, because at least I could justify why I had been
you're not
in pain.
a wimp.
Yeah, I'm not
exactly.
a wimp.
Yeah.
So I ended up in a plaster cast or a fiberglass cast, and I moved back from Brisbane, and I remember, I was on crutches, and then that was hurting my shoulder. So then I remember Mum had to wheel me into training in a wheelchair, and I used to train with a plaster cast on my leg at the aquatic centre.
So you kept training?
So I kept training while I was going to the Commonwealth Games. So they put me in the cast. I think I was in the cast for maybe 4 or 6 weeks or something. And I was swimming with a cast on. I was training with like the 12-year-olds. Here I was going to the Olympics and I was being beaten by everyone. And that was all a bit demoralising. So it wasn't the ideal preparation for the Commonwealth Games. And, of course, coming off the Olympics, everyone, fourth at the Olympics, all these finals, everyone was like, yep, she's the one. And suddenly it wasn't looking like I was the one at all. It was a bit bad. So that was not a great experience. I called it one of my annus horribilis. I had a few of them, but still went to the Commonwealth Games. I came out of plaster the day before we got on the plane.
Oh, goodness,
Limped
Anna.
onto the plane, got there, wasn't allowed to march in the opening ceremony. They wouldn't let me because I was, had just come out of, and I was like, oh, really?
Couldn't they push you out in a wheelchair?
Yeah. Well, no, that wouldn't have. It was not the Paralympic style. So, no, I don't think they would have.
Keep up appearances,
Yeah, they
I
would.
guess.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think the Australian swimming team would have wanted that. Yeah, I made 2 finals and I finished 5th and 8th, which was pretty devastating because I kind of thought, and also you go to the Commonwealth Games. There's not too many Australian swimmers that go to the Commonwealth Games and don't win a gold medal or win a medal. And I'd also been in the 4x200 relay team, but in those days I swam in the heat because they'd saved the 2 fastest for the final, one of the other 2 fastest in the heat, then I didn't get to swim the final. And now if you swim in a heat, you get the gold medal. But in those days, you didn't get the gold medal for being a heat swimmer. So I was like, when they got home, everyone who won a medal got to go to like Lord Howe Island or something, and I was like left behind. So it was quite a traumatic experience. But I did, after the Commonwealth Games, travelled around Europe with my sister for a bit and went to London. I mean, I had a fun time. And
so what was going on in your head at that point in regards to swimming? Were you thinking, oh no, I've still got a lot in me to keep going, or where were you at that point?
Well, I was, it was pretty tricky. It was hard because I think I'd sort of been on such a high, it was a life lesson, really, life experience.
Be frustrating.
I was thinking, would I or wouldn't I continue? But I came back and I sort of had a break and I did a lot of swim teaching and worked for decks and stuff, did a lot of swim teaching out of Elizabeth. I quite enjoyed that sort of giving back. Ran a program called Flipperball, which was like modified rules water polo. So I was quite involved, in teaching and sharing and teaching kids. And I love that. I love that sort of giving. And I was starting physio. So I wasn't making any big decisions. And I made up for lost time, let's just say, in the social stakes. Started physio and got back into swimming. Yeah.
On a recreational level, I got when you say go back.
No.
So you got back into professional
it,
swimming.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. So I swam, I think I changed coaches again. I think I ended up swimming with Peter Bishop at Norwood actually during my first year of, maybe that was later when I made another comeback. Maybe back with Graham. Can't really remember exactly. But I did swim, and basically the long and short of it that was when I kind of realised it was more fun getting home at 4:30 in the morning than getting up at 4:30 in the morning, although I was doing both for a bit and studying physio, which was really fun and full on. I mean, that was in the days where you went to uni and you kind of all knew everyone who was doing your course and everything was face to face. And if you weren't in a lecture or tute, you were in the bar, the cafe or the library, fun. And then the Olympic trials would have been early the next year. And I think over that summer, I kind of decided that I knew I wasn't going to make the Olympic team. So I did retiring. And I remember the advertiser came to the house and, Anna McVann's hanging up her boots or her togs. That was it, done. So then I was into second year physio, fun. And then I think by the time I got to third year, I was a bit bored of all the partying and it was fun. And so I started to get back into my swimming and was actually doing quite well. And then finished physio and got offered a job at the Royal Adelaide, which is like the creme de la creme. Like there was only 7 or 8 jobs. And But at the same time, I'd actually applied. During those years I wasn't swimming, there was something called the Women's Apprentice Coaching Scheme. So I'd done my level 1 coaching course with a guy called Dr. Ralph Richards, who was a swim coach, and he'd moved to the AIS to coach. So I'd sort of been liaising with him, and we sort of lined it up, and I ended up getting a scholarship to the AIS. So I'd finished physio. My parents were like, yeah, she's got a job, life's going. And then I just said, actually, just letting you know that I'm not going to take that job, but I'm going to go to the AIS on a swimming scholarship and swim. They're like, what? And I got a part-time job at the Woden Valley Hospital, which is now Canberra Hospital. And so I turned 21 over the summer, and then I packed up my bags and drove my Honda Civic to Canberra for my comeback.
Oh, my God. So how did that go?
That was 1991.
Right.
And I was all for the Olympics in 92. Yeah, it was great. I had a great time. It was really fun. I swam pretty well. But at the Olympic trials, you had to finish in the top. I think it was the top 4 then. So the 200 freestyle was my focus then. And I was it's a bit bigger. I wasn't quite the greyhound that I had been in the 80s. And I didn't make the team, not by much. And so then I was like, right, what's next? And then there was like something like the World University Games, which I was still eligible. My mum and dad were just like, I don't think so. Like they were like, we think it's time. And I think, after a bit I thought, actually, I'd got 4th at the Olympics. Would I ever better that really, realistically? At the ripe old age of 22, I think I was. And so that was it. So I finished up there and then and stayed in Canberra for a few years.
And worked as a physio at the Canberra Hospital.
Yep. I was physio for the Tuggeranong Vikings, which was a rugby league club, and the Ainslie Footy Club.
But you continued to go to the Olympics in a different capacity.
Wow. Yeah. Well, what happened next was I always wanted to travel. So remember, that was one of my things. So, and I had obviously done quite a bit of travelling with swimming. And so I decided I would go overseas. Was working in London to start with, just doing agency work in London. I was working at Crystal Palace. Okay, so Crystal Palace was a big sports injury clinic, kind of like the Institute of Sport in Australia or South Australia. Crystal Palace was where they'd held the Olympics or the Commonwealth Games or something years ago, and that's what it was built for. And there was this sports injury clinic under the grandstand at Crystal Palace, and it was sort of the prime of sporting physio in London. And I'd got a job there. Not necessarily based on my physio skills, but I think they saw that I'd swum at the Olympics on my CV. And I think everyone kind of thinks if you've swum at the Olympics, you must be Olympic standard at everything. So I took the job, and it was this amazing clinic, and we worked with all these sporting teams. Then through there, I became physio for the British diving team, and we were physio for the London Broncos, which was kind of like the Brisbane Broncos had moved to London. Like they were all Brisbane boys that were playing for the rugby league team, and all these world athletics meets would be run at Crystal Palace, so we'd be the physio for them. So it was, it was great. So I ended up as physio for the British diving team, and through that ran into some people at these meets. I'd travel around with the diving team, so I'd go to Europe and America, across, Atlantic with the teams. Caught up with the Australian diving team. There was a few connections there from my swimming days. And so suddenly, because the Australian diving team couldn't afford their own physio to fly over from Australia, so then I became the physio for the Australian diving team based in London. So I ended up going to the Commonwealth Games with them to Victoria, Canada in 94. Wasn't officially on the team, but was there with them. Used to meet them in Florida. They had meets in Florida. They were fun. I ended up going to the Atlanta Olympics with them in 96, but again, not on the team. And then I got a pass to get into the village, and then it became very political. So I started to see the other side of elite sport. I'd always been the athlete, saw the world through rose-coloured glasses, and suddenly I'm involved in sort of obviously the medical side, but the admin side of sport. And the fact that the divers didn't have their own physio that came from Australia, they didn't have the financial backing that, say, the swimmers and the cyclists did. But we'd be on these training camps and I'd be there, but I wasn't actually officially on the team. So there was a bit of like, oh, what's she doing here? And it's like, well, the diving team were like, she's our physio, So there was a bit of politics. So I wasn't allowed into the village, which is kind of fair enough, because I guess, if you're a physio on the Olympic team, that's like being a swimmer that gets to the Olympics. That's the pinnacle of your career, and suddenly I'm just swanning in the side. The divers, very different sort of discipline at that stage from my perspective, compared to the swimmers, even though we did fairly festive in our day. Post-events, the divers were... Yeah, and interesting.
Not so festive?
Well, very festive. Very festive.
They were
probably
festive.
A little bit more festive.
Oh, more festive. Okay.
But amazing athletes too. And I think as swimmers, we sort of, you sort of look at the divers and the synchronised swimmers and think, But yeah, amazing. So they had some very challenging injuries, of course, hitting the water at such great force and just their gymnastic ability. And so that was a great experience.
So how many years altogether did you do that for?
So I was over there on and off. I worked in Canada too, did a season in the ski fields in Whistler in between all that as a physio, which was fun. So I was overseas probably from 94 till the end of 97 when I decided I'd come home to do my master's in manip physio. So I'd sort of had a lot of sports stuff. So I chose to do my master's in more manual stuff rather than sports because I felt like I had the sports kind of knowledge.
Done, dusted.
Not long after that got my sports title or whatever. So that was all sort of ticked. So I came back to do my master's, came back home through Africa, and I thought I'd always go back, straight back overseas and work overseas. I always visualised myself living in Paris or New York or in a big city, London maybe. Or I came home through Cape Town and I went to the university and I went to a big sports clinic in Cape Town and sort of was planting the seed to go back and work there. But the sports clinic didn't matter what I'd done. The fact that I was female I was very much like wasn't interesting. And then the university, they had quotas then. So you had to have equal black and white students regardless of their academic ability to enter the university in Cape Town as a physio. So I thought, interesting. I didn't go. I never went back there.
Never
pursue that. Well, no. Well, I came home, did my master's, was planning my next little adventure, had literally just handed in my thesis. So this was sort of mid-98 and then went on a camping trip to the Flinders and met Farmer Tom.
Oh, okay. Let's get to Farmer Tom.
In a creek bed.
In a creek
He said
bed.
he didn't want me to talk about him. I'm like, it's been 25 years nearly. So
more details, please.
So a mutual friend of ours, a different Matthew Pick, was family friends of ours growing up and then had been at Ag College with Tom. He'd also been to medical school and then is now a winemaker, but he's very highly trained, our dear friend Picky. And he organised this camping trip on the June long weekend in the Flinders. Well, I thought that I was the only single girl and there's a lot of single boys. Picky had a new girlfriend, his now wife, Fiona Donald, and I remember going up in the car with them. First night we must have stayed at Hawker maybe.
Ironic, yeah.
But Tom wasn't there then because he played association footy. I think he played at Kadina on the Saturday of the long weekend. So unbeknown to me, Picky had left a note on the pinboard at the Blinman pub for this guy who was coming. Anyway, so we're all in the creek bed and suddenly this ute comes in, lights, out steps this guy in a red jumper. I said to the others, I think the farmer's come to tell us off. And they were like, oh, no, that's Tom. So anyway, Tom had played footy in Kadina, driven to Blinman, had 2 flat tyres on the way, driven to Blinman, found the note on the pub, go 2 creek beds down, turn in the gate, come on. And he rocked up and he said all he remembered was that I was obviously had a few champagnes that night. I was a bit loud. Anyway, the next day, so we'd all been up there watching the stars, fun, camping trip. And then the next morning he'd said, does anyone want to come in the ute with me? I've got to get my tyres fixed. I'm like, oh, sure, I'll come. And it turned out that the girl I was living with at the time was best friends with his sister. And I'd met his sister, but I didn't know him at all. He said he remembered me from Judy's dancing. I think it might have been the Blue and White he might have remembered me from years ago that, someone had pointed me out as the Olympic swimmer. But
so let's just go back. So you put your hand up and said, yes, I'll go with you. So you must have thought, no, he's all right.
Oh, I'm always up for a bit of adventure. No, I wasn't actually. I don't think I was thinking that way. But he said I talked at him the whole time. He said that he had to stop and get beers out. Anyway, but of course, I didn't actually end up kissing him or anything on that camping trip. And of course, unbeknown to me, he did have a girlfriend sort of at the time, but not really, and I didn't know that. So that was kind of well. But I ended up going out with a different boy from the camping trip who was living in London, another friend of Picky's. And I remember I went to back to London for a friend's wedding and that didn't go anywhere. So that was fine. And then I got back from that trip and re-met Tom at one of those. They used to have these balls at the museum balls, things. They were called like Get Humped and Have a Whale of a Time or something like that. Or I can't even remember what they were called. But, it was like a B&S in the city kind of thing, black tie. And I remember meeting up with him.
Bring them back.
Yeah, I'm sure that's what it was called. No, but and there was things about dinosaur parties. I can't remember. I'd have to Google it to see what they were. But the museum balls they were and really fun. So I met up with him again that night. And that would have been about the September or October of 98 maybe. And luckily I was living with this friend who was off a farm. And so we'd be going out for dinner and he wouldn't turn up or it would be covered in sheep stain or... And I was like, really? And she's like, he's lovely. And I remember coming up here for the first time And just thinking, he could be like taking me anywhere. And Tom at that stage lived at Boobarawi, which was another 20 minutes.
Oh,
on
right.
this little house with palm trees out the front, earwigs in the kettle, freezing cold. And I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? But the funny thing about that was then actually he'd come home from that camping trip and said to his mum, I think, do you remember that Olympic swimmer, Anna McVann? I met her on the weekend. And he said to her, she's on Zoloft. You wouldn't believe it. She's on an antidepressant. And I think I was at the time.
What?
I'd come back from overseas, living, I'd been living the dream, back at home, living with my parents where I had been 6 years ago. I had a bit of it wasn't a great year.
Okay.
I was studying and living at home with mum and dad. All my friends were married, finished their degrees, all working, earning money. And here I was back with my parents. It was a bit of a transitional time. It was okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of people on
But the fact that
antidepressants.
he's
told his mum. And so you can imagine when he brought me home to stay or visit one time, she'd have been thinking, oh, what has the cat dragged in? So I thought that was quite funny. Poor Anne Hawker must have, when he did finally bring me home. But look, all's well that ends well. So that was 98. Came off Zoloft. Once I got my master's, I think that was sort of put that to bed and moved on, got a job. No one could believe that I'd met a farmer. Of all the people who would, marry a farmer, it was me. But, we sort of went out for couple of years. We got engaged in 2000 actually, just before the Olympics. I was commuting. I worked up here for a bit in Clare and that was all too hard. I thought, I always thought I'd marry a banker actually and live in London. But the interesting thing too, I always used to find in London, I lived there on and off, the boys you could take out in a dinner suit, you couldn't take on a mountain bike ride or a hike with. Do you know what I mean? The London, like the boys that we hung out with. That's not true. Some of my English friends would debate that, but anyway,
so what was about Tom that
boy.
you liked? He was good with his hands, the rustic nature of it all.
Yeah, I think he just compliments me. Like I'm all or nothing and he's just level. He's a bit of a thinker. He's very smart, even though on paper not very academic. Having said that, he's, done postgrad study and everything and he's a very, very smart and capable farmer, obviously. He said in our wedding speech, he likes the wings on the chicken, I like the drumstick. I like to go for a run, whereas he loves ball sports, saying that I didn't even know the difference between seeding and harvest. And I didn't. I didn't know anything about farm life. I knew nothing.
What did your family think when you met a farmer?
Tom kept saying, you can't, I must have said I was going to run away at some stage because he said, well, you can't. Your dad will just send you straight back. He said, your father was so thankful that I came along. But ironically, the funny thing was, I'll never forget, Tom used to rock up, his ute, late, whatever. And the first time he met my parents, I remember we were going up to the restaurant, Norton Summit, and he was meeting my parents. Anyway, he rocks up in his parents' Commodore. So every time I'd have been the ute, rocks up in his parents' Commodore in a suit to meet my parents. I'm like, what? What is going on here? Of course, Mum and Dad thought it was heaven on a stick. There was one funny story, actually. When I was dating Tom, my sister in Melbourne had met a family friend of the Hawkers, and he'd said to Sue, my sister, did you know your sister's dating one of the most eligible bachelors in South Australia and he's got a town named after him? And Sue said, does he know she's got a street named after her in Paralawi? So I've got a McVann street named after me in Paralawi. Isn't that the funniest story ever? So look, I didn't know anything about farming. The Hawkers obviously have a massive tradition up here and obviously Bungaree and the family history, which I love, and I haven't really probably taken on as much as I should, but I sort of am understanding it more and more now and trying to gather that knowledge. Obviously Tom's dad has passed away, but there's, books written. It's great. You can look up your family tree in a book. Yeah. That's the Hawkers. And we can't do that with the McVanns. My farmer clients that come laugh and they're like, oh, so you're the wife of a farmer. So I'm not a farmer's wife. I've been in the sheep yards. I did a certificate in rural office practice when we were first married, but I nearly failed and I didn't finish it because I sat around the table talking about succession planning with all these women in their Chetwynd and Bulrush, and they were talking about farming. And I was, when you just have a light bulb moment and you go, actually, I have my master's in physio. I'm pretty good at what I do. They wouldn't let me into the farm office then anyway, and I still don't really. Like Tom, I've had a few moments where I've gone in and it just doesn't work. Like we're better if we, I think, we work together, but separate. Yeah. So I'm the wife of a farmer. Having said that, I did rouse in the shearing shed for 4 hours last Saturday. First time ever.
First time ever
rousing, 4 hours. Yeah. But I've been in the sheep yards a few times and I do help. I do, like during seeding and harvest.
So once you got married and you started having kids, because you had 4 kids in a very short period of time, It must have been really difficult in those early days.
Do you know, I can't actually remember much from 2003 to 2009, and I say that with complete, like, that is true. And I look at photos and I go, where was that? I remember when Mum was alive, and she'd say, don't you remember we went to Robe? I'm like, did we? She'd pull out the photos. Oh, so we did. I mean, I worked.
You kept working.
I kept
all
working.
through.
Yeah, I
having
never
the
had
kids.
more than maybe 3 or 4 months off after each baby. Only part-time, but, you know, that was one of the things. Work part-time if I want to. Travel the world. I'd done that. Was working part-time. Yeah, when I first came to Clare, I worked in the hospital and worked in a couple of physio practices, and then Physio Clare, I was there for 15 years, and that was great. I mean, we were all mums, apart from the boys, obviously, and they were dads. It just worked, and do you know what? I can't remember. I can't really remember.
Well, sitting out here on your deck now, it's a beautiful sunny day. We're looking over this big, beautiful dam, sprawling green lawns, a swimming pool. Life's looking pretty good from an outsider's perspective looking into your life.
Yeah, yeah.
Is life pretty good?
Yeah. Look, I mean,
Kids are all away at boarding school.
Very fortunate. Yeah, well, that's challenging at times. You know, that's a decision we make. But yeah, it just goes so quickly. I think that's the big thing. Life just goes so quickly. Like, you know, the Clare Valley is a beautiful place to live. And people say, how do you go living on a farm? Well, it's never all beer and Skittles, is it? But we've got 4 healthy children who are all within the boundaries of normal. You know, some days are better than others. It's a full-time job looking after them, even though they're at boarding school and interstate and studying.
Any of them want to follow your footsteps and swim? Or physio?
Swim. So we have got one doing physio. They all swam. They all swam. Yep, and they're all very good swimmers.
Oh, of course.
I think there was a little bit of pressure on them. They're all doing other sports now. Like Imogen was my last one. She swam to quite a high level and nearly made nationals, and she's now rowing. So she's the last one. And the boys moved into, you know, footy pretty quickly. They love team sports. And Jess is running, so she's part of Runners One, which is a big running club in Adelaide with quite a few Olympians as the coaches, and so she's loving that. And she's studying physio, so she's second-year physio, so third-generation physio.
What do your kids think about your history?
I think they're very proud. I think there've certainly been moments where they would like to crawl under a rock and wish it hadn't happened. I think.
Why?
I think little things like, I don't know if anyone's been to the aquatic centre at Marion, but there's a picture of me on the wall standing on the balcony as a member of the Swimming Hall of Fame. The picture they have of me is on the balcony at the town hall after the ticker tape parade when we got back from the Olympics, and I literally look like I think I'm a rock star standing on the balcony with my arms in the air. So everyone else has swimming photos, and in fact my dad, before he passed away, one of his wishes was that I had a swimming photo put up there, so I must do that. But I guess, you know, they're always it was always like my brothers and sisters, Anna McVann's sister or brother, Anna McVann's child. But I think there probably is a bit of an inherent pressure on them. Certainly in the swimming pool there was, you know, oh, your mum's an Olympic swimmer, are you going to the Olympics? But they've all risen above that. They've all got their own passions and their own, and I think they you know, are proud of what I achieved, and hopefully a little bit of that sort of discipline and hard work and drive to succeed has come through the gene pool. I think it has, actually. I can almost certainly say it has.
What's the next step for you?
Well,
what's the next step for Anna Walker?
In fact, someone asked me about what my goals were for the next 3 years, and I couldn't answer that. I know where I would want to be in 10 years' time. So I'm running my own physio business now, which I never really wanted to do. I always worked for other people and love that, but I decided to have a break when Tom's dad was quite sick and our eldest 2 were about to go to boarding school. I pulled out of Physio Clare, took long service leave, and then decided I'd just do my own thing. And I had run Pilates there for years, Pilates mat classes, and I'd started a course in 2000 before we got married on the equipment. That there was no equipment in Clare and I didn't have the equipment, which is quite expensive. I then went on and finished my course, my Pilates equipment course. My dad passed away and left me a bit of money, so I bought the rest of my equipment. I already had a few pieces, and I'd finished at Physio Clare and I'd started to see a few patients at home, and then it just grew from there. Started to run mat classes, and so now I've taken over the farm dining room and I have my own clinical Pilates studio and physio practice.
Well done.
And I never wanted to run my own business, and it wasn't till my mum passed away and I did her eulogy, and I knew she was a physio obviously, but I worked out that she only started her physio practice when I was in year 11 or 12, so she was 50 or so. And I thought, oh wow, because I sort of thought, oh well, I'm too old to start my own practice. I don't want to. But so I'm now running my own business. I wish I'd done just one business subject. I say I'm very good at earning and spending money, but I'm not very good at managing it. And business is not my thing, but I love my job. So I don't like the business side. I don't have anyone helping me with that. I keep thinking about getting someone to help, but then I think then I might have someone else to manage. I've already got 4 children and a husband.
So that is what you're doing now.
Yeah.
So where do you see yourself in 10 years' time then?
Well, I would hope that we would be travelling. And this is my thing too. I feel like I've got more to give. So obviously I have coached the swimming club here for over 10 years now. Head coach of the swimming club.
Not anymore though.
Well, I'm still involved and I love it. I
Okay.
really love it. I just can't run the whole show because I can't give that time commitment with my business and the kids everywhere. And it's time for someone else to kind of be involved. So I love it. I'm so passionate about it and I love doing that. And I love helping kids and I love teaching kids to swim and making a difference. And so I will continue to do that in some shape or form. I said to Tom, I would love us to travel and I could work doing physio stuff or swimming stuff, and he could maybe do some farming stuff in less fortunate communities.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what I would see myself, perhaps us doing, in providing someone else comes and runs the farm.
I was wondering that. I'm thinking the boy's going to come back here.
Well, we've got 4 children, let's not be gender, hopefully.
Oh, girls, yes, I should say that. Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
But, otherwise, there's lots of other ways to run a farm, aren't there, these days? And in the short term, I feel like COVID has been really challenging for everyone, of course, but in health, particularly as a sole practitioner, the responsibility of that has sort of worn me down a little bit. So I feel like I told you I dabbled in a bit of teaching this year back at Uni SA and I enjoyed that. It was quite challenging. I mean, the travel was challenging. There were lots of challenges with that, and I haven't continued with that just now, but that might be something I look into. When I was finishing off my Pilates stuff, I worked a day a week at a clinic in Adelaide. So I've got lots of, obviously, physio connections. Maybe that is something I might do.
Mm-hmm.
So lots of options. But, I mean, I've been very fortunate, very grateful for where I've landed. And I feel like you create your own luck a bit. People often say to me, you were so lucky you went to the Olympics. Well, look, definitely
hard,
the opportunities presented. And I was very fortunate that I had a family that supported me unconditionally. Financially, they could afford for that to happen. And I was
going to say, because all that swimming and coaching, it would have been quite costly towards the end of it if you added all up.
Well, I mean, the beautiful thing about swimming is that, the government pays for a lot of those trips. So Mum and Dad weren't necessarily, spending money. I'm obviously coaching and stuff, but I was lucky in the day, early days of sort of, I was never sponsored, but I got given a car, jelly beans, and Speedo used to give me bathers. And so, I was pretty lucky in that respect. And coaching fees weren't, massive. So, yeah, I was very fortunate. All the ducks lined up for me and I've continued to be. A couple of my family members like, we knew that would work out for you because everything does.
What are you the most proud of? First thing that comes to mind.
I think I'm proud of the fact that Tom and I together have produced 4 beautiful children, all healthy at the moment, touch wood, and happy. So that's obviously, incredible, and they're all going on to do things and hopefully grow up to be good, kind-hearted people, which they already are. Because I think that's what I'm proud of. I'm proud of the fact that I love doing things for other people, and I hope that we have passed that on to our children as well, which I'm sure we have. So I'm extremely proud of them. I'm proud of my husband. He does an amazing job on our farm. So, the philosophy always been, I guess, that you want to leave the land in a better place than you found it. And he's certainly, done that in spades, I think. And so we both have a big work ethic and we've passed that on to our children. So I think we're proud of that. I think proud of all of the kids that I have had the privilege of coaching, and hopefully I've passed some of that on to them, that it's not about being the best. It's just about being the best that you can. And I feel that I wasn't the best at what I did, but I definitely got the best out of myself in that space. And now that's kind of backfires a bit. Like I know what it's like to be the best in the world at something. And so it's a bit of a cop out, but there's a lot more to life than putting all your eggs in one basket. And so I feel like I've been privileged enough to know that.
You're always searching for the next thing. Does it feel like that? You don't let moss grow between your toes, that's for sure. Yeah.
I have a bit of a problem at sitting still. This is good for me. Really good. Actually, I haven't got up to do anything. Yeah, and people will say that.
My daughter, her dream is to be an Olympian swimmer or runner. That's all she wants to do. She's only 8. She doesn't know what's involved in that. But for those kids that are listening to this, or adults with kids that are really good at sport or have the potential to go further, what's your piece of advice to them?
just don't be afraid to dream big. Like, just follow your dreams. The bit I didn't tell you was actually I flew to the Moscow Olympics with a friend on her pet budgerigars. Like, I had this thing when I was in year 7 at school. She was at another primary school. We went to the Olympics on her budgerigars. That was our little fantasy thing. Like, so that was the Olympic. And then
what
4
do you
years
mean?
later.
Sorry, what does that mean?
Well, we pretended the Moscow Olympics were on and she had 2 budgerigars, Percy and Peppy, and we dreamed or we visualised that we were, well, pretended that we were flying to the Olympics on her budgerigars. And so I think don't be afraid to dream big, set goals. If I'd listened to that couple that said to me, you're wasting your time and money, like, don't let anyone get in the way of it. Don't be afraid to chase your dreams. Seriously, anyone can do it. To the kids, I would say, dream big, follow your dreams, don't let anyone tell you can't do it. But to the parents, I would say it's got to come from them. Like, at the end of the day, they have to be the ones that want to do it. You can only lead a horse to water. And, that's the number of people I meet, I nearly made it to the Olympics, or I would have been an AFL player. Like, yeah, right. Everyone. There's a million of those people. And look, for whatever reason, that didn't happen for them. But actually, you can do it. You can do it.
Anna, awesome story. I'm just in awe of you, and I learned so much in the last hour or so. I didn't know half of that, so thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Lovely to speak to you, Belle.
Anna Hawker, just wow. How wonderful to have someone like Anna in our Clare Valley community teaching the next generation of swimmers. We're very lucky to have her. Anna was also inducted into the South Australian Swimming Hall of Fame back in 2008. I hope you enjoyed this roller coaster of a ride with Anna Hawker. Please share this episode with family and friends. Her story is pretty special. Catch you next time for another episode of the Voice It podcast.